Hey, Tanya here from MiSlope.com. In this video, I'm going to show you how I constructed and sewed a bikini top from a pattern I drafted using the MiSlope Dartless Torso Sloper. I'm going to head over to MiSlope.com, enter the drafting library, and pull up the Dartless Torso Sloper. I've already preloaded my measurement profile, so I'm going to load that into the tool, enter my level of negative ease, and download my block super quick and easy. And then I'm going to drop my sloper into Adobe Illustrator, and I'm fast forwarding through the drafting process for this top since this video is about construction, but I will do a deeper dive on how to create the pattern in another video. My goal is to demonstrate a mix of construction methods to give you an idea of how you can construct your own design made from your own sewing patterns. So typically with ready-made sewing patterns, there will be instructions on how to construct the garment, but because you are designing your pattern yourself, you need to think about how you're going to construct your final garment when you're designing your pattern. Hopefully watching me sew my design will give you ideas on how you can construct your own designs. So I've laid out all of my pattern pieces ready to sew. We have our main fabric in blue, our lining pieces in white, and we're doing a mesh panel in the center. First thing we're going to do is we're going to use concealed seams to attach all these pieces to our front panel. So we are going to essentially sandwich our mesh piece in between our blue main fabric and our white lining. We're going to put right sides together of our main fabric, mesh, and then sandwich the white lining on top of those pieces. So main mesh lining. The seams are curved, so it's going to be somewhat tricky to align the pieces, but with patience, we'll get there. And I'm a big fan of pinning. It's a bit time consuming, and I know that there are other ways to go about this, like basting stitches and clips. We are going to head over to the serger and sew all our pieces together. So now when we turn our pieces right side out, we can see how the seam is concealed between the main fabric and the lining. We're going to do the same sandwich method with the remaining pieces. Just make sure you sandwich your main fabric on the correct side, and remember we're doing right sides together. So the blue on top of the blue side and the white on top of the white side. We're gonna head to the serger and we're gonna sew those pieces all together. And I don't feel like you have to do any understitching here because the tension in the top will pull the main and lining fabric across, and you won't have any of the lining fabric showing. And let's sew this baby up. And so you can see that that seam is also hidden between our main fabric and our lining. That is the end of the front panel sewing. And we can now work on the back panel and attaching everything together. We are going to be using concealed seams in the side seams. So this is a method you would use if you're going to finish off your edges using binding or fold over elastic. So what we're going to do now is we are going to sandwich our front panel in between our back panel. So we're going to lay the main fabric, the blue, right sides together, and sandwich our lining right sides together and pin the side seams. So you'll see the two back panel pieces sandwiching the front panel pieces, and then we're pinning the side seams. So you can see when I fold it over how this is going to sandwich the front panel, and then so the side seams, pin everything up, and the side seams will be concealed. The next seam we will be sewing is our neckline. We will be doing fold over elastic for the neckline, and then we'll be finishing off the rest of the edges around the armhole and back to create a halter top. So first step will be fold over elastic on the neckline. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to sew elastic on the wrong side, the lining, the white piece, using my elastic foot with my serger, and then I'm going to top stitch the elastic down. So I'm going to fold over the elastic towards the wrong side. So you can see the overlock stitches on the right side of the fabric and the elastic is on the wrong side of the fabric. So I'm going to fold over the elastic towards the lining and top stitch it down. So I'm using an industrial cover stitch machine and I'm doing a 2 threads top stitch. I'm also using a leader fabric to help me feed my neckline into the machine, or else you can have feeding issues. So you can see the 2-thread top stitch, and then when I flip it over, the elastic is folded down, stitched on. Okay, so now we are going to attach the elastic around the armholes and back, and also the underbust. So we will later feed the elastic and the edges into our binder and attach binding. I pre-measured how much elastic I will need to cover the edges, and then have enough to tie a bow around my neck. So I'm going to sew the elastic on the wrong sides of my seam, so on the lining, and I also marked on the elastic where the edge will start versus the strap part, so I know how much slack to give the elastic. I also sewed the elastic onto the wrong side for the underbust, and I will use my binder to attach the binding. This is kind of somewhat of an unconventional way to do it. So I bind in the round by feeding my underbust into the binder at an angle, and then I cut at an angle and bind over where I started. So this way you can bind in the round without having to, you know, bind and sew your side seams. But yeah. I'm also using a binder on a flatbed machine, which makes it a bit tricky. So ideally for binding on an industrial machine, and honestly even a domestic machine, you want to be using a collarette machine. This is the industry term where the binder is kind of a step down, but you know what, we're improvising. And here is the final product. I wore the top to the beach before filming this, so there is some sunscreen on the fabric. Let's just ignore that. I also adjusted my design a bit and created the same top in black. Just the design changes that I made to that top was I raised the bust line, the underbust line up a bit to sit right under my bust radius, and I lowered the neckline a little bit. But yeah. Hopefully you enjoyed this video and this gave you some inspiration on how to sew your next project, and then also just some tips on how to think about construction when you're designing your final garment. So if you were to do, let's say, concealed seams on your edges, for example, you would approach it differently versus if you were doing fold over elastic with binding for straps, for example. More to come in other videos on that. All right, Tanya out.